Well, hello everyone and welcome to the concurrent panel focused on protective factors across childhood and adolescence. My name is Jessie Lee McIsaac and I'll be your moderator for this session. As was mentioned, I am a member of the HRC. I'm an associate professor and a Canada Research Chair in Early Childhood at Mount St. Vincent University. I'm grateful to be located in Chibuktuk, also known as Halifax, part of Mi'kmaq, the unceded ancestral territory which remains the homeland of the Mi'kmaq Nation. In my own work, I direct the Early Childhood Collaborative Research Center, and our work in mental health promotion focuses on supporting caregivers with responsive and supportive environments that foster the development of early social and emotional skills. So this session this afternoon focuses on protective factors, the ways that we can enhance positive mental health at individual, family, community, societal, and structural levels. And we have three excellent panelists with us today. Dr. Emily Jenkins, Dr. Marlene Moretti, and Dr. Mary Motz. And the panelists today will share their experiences of promoting lifelong mental wellness through interventions during the formative years from prenatal to adolescence. I'm so pleased to have the opportunity to have this discussion today with Emily, Marlene, and Mary. And I have questions that will support our conversation, but if anyone in the audience has questions throughout our discussion, please feel free to put those into the chat and we'll bring them into the discussion. And also just a note, in this breakout discussion, we don't have the option to pin the speakers for you, but you're welcome to change your view in Zoom so you're seeing the speaker mode or multi-speaker mode. And if you have any questions about that, just put it in the chat and I'm sure Annette can help. So without further ado, let's get the conversation started. So I will invite our panelists to first introduce themselves and locate their work in mental health promotion. Emily, could you please begin?
Thanks so much, Jessie Lee. I'm just trying to make sure I've got audio is working. Nice to see everyone online. My name is Emily Jenkins. I'm a professor at the School of Nursing at the University of British Columbia and the scientific director of Wellstream, which is the Canadian Centre for Innovation in Child and Youth Mental Health and Substance Use. I'm joining today from the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam people at UBC, where I live and work. My work in mental health promotion focuses on fostering positive mental health and reducing substance use harms for children, youth, and their communities. And for the last several years, I've been part of the MHP-IF community as part of my work on the Agenda Gap program. An Agenda Gap is a facilitated relationships building program that supports groups of youth who are between the ages of 12 and 18 to identify issues that impact mental health in their communities, and then to take action to change policies or programs to strengthen well-being. During the last few years, as part of our phase 2 work, we've been refining and expanding Agenda Gap to communities in BC, Ontario, Alberta, and Nova Scotia. And just a bit of a personal plug, we're always looking for additional sites to do this work. So if there's interest, do reach out. One of our key partnerships grew from connecting during a past KDE Hub symposium. So we would welcome the opportunity to connect. Thanks, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks so much, Emily. Marlene, did you want to introduce yourself as well?
Sure, thank you, Emily, and thanks for the opportunity to join you all here. Like Emily, I'm joining from the Vancouver on the unceded traditional territory of the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh Nations. And I am a professor of psychology at Simon Fraser University, and I'm a Canada Research Chair in Youth Clinical Psychological Science. And I have had the enormous privilege and pleasure of working with practitioners across Canada and internationally on how to support caregivers, parents, kinship, foster, and other carers of adolescents. And together we have developed a program called Connect. It is an evidence-based program. It is a brief program designed to be delivered by practitioners in communities where families reside. And so we've spent a lot of time doing that work. I'm also the director of the Adolescent Health Lab, and it's been a privilege to work with graduate students for 3 decades who've all gone on to have great careers. So it's wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marlene. Mary?
Sorry, here I am. Hi, everyone. I feel I have a bit of imposter syndrome in this. I feel like I have the least impressive credentials of all of the panelists, but here I am. My name is Mary Motes. I'm a clinical psychologist in Toronto, which is Treaty 13 territory and the home of many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. And I work at a community-based program called Breaking the Cycle. We support pregnant people and mothers with children from 0 to 6 who identify as having addiction-related issues. That is our identifier for care, but it's not the only or the most important issue that our families face. And so we provide service in the context of a one-stop shop wraparound program where we try to provide as many of the different supports as families need in one place. We also have home visiting and a pregnancy outreach program. And we have long, deep relationships with families. So we can see families up until children turn 6 years. But on average, we see families between 2 and 3 years and 1 to 3 times per week. So it is that opportunity for early intervention services to support lots of different needs. And in the context of that role, I get to dance in many different places, and that's the privilege of a psychologist. I get to be a clinician. I also head up the research program here. So I've been with the program for almost 30 years. And had an opportunity to grow and build those 2 different parts of that work. And then, as far as one of our major research projects is with the Mental Health in the Early Years Initiative, and that's the early relationship study with Dr. Nicole Racine from the University of Ottawa. And that's where we're looking at long-term outcomes for children with multiple ACEs. Including the kids at Breaking the Cycle and at another program called Maxine Wright, which is in Surrey, BC. So that's our sister site for that project. So maybe I'll just leave things there for now. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Mary. You'll bring such unique and different expertise that I think this is going to be a great conversation. So why don't we just launch into a focus on protective factors? So as was mentioned, this session is really focused on protective factors for mental health. So Marlene, maybe you could begin and just tell us a bit about how you define protective factors for mental health and why they're so important to consider with the population that you work with.
Yeah, well, first of all, just listening to Emily and Mary, we're a great group to have together because we're focusing on those early years and we're focusing, on later years as well. And, it's interesting when you pitched it as protective factors, and having been working in this field for a long time, we talk about risk and we talk about protective factors. And I think really words matter a lot. And so, protective factors kind of give this sense that we're creating this shield or a defense against, adversity. And that kind of makes sense. But in the work that I do, I really think about it more as a building resilience and building resilience. I situate more. We can think of some kids or people, we think of this, they're people who are resilient or less resilient. I don't think about it that way. I think about that interface of relationships. And Mary, I was listening to you and those ongoing relationships, the relationships that children have with their parents, but with other caring adults as well. And so when we think about resilience, we think about how can we promote resilience in that relationship, especially during the adolescent years, because it's so difficult for, I think, parents sometimes to deal with the challenges that come up in adolescence. And, we look to see how can we do this in a way that's really strength focused, that helps to equip parents with really a toolkit in the simplest, briefest way possible by their local community to be able to, navigate those potholes along the way. I think that when we think of younger children, it's really important to invest in early childhood, and we should always keep our eye on those investments. Unfortunately, I don't think we've invested as much as in adolescence. And what we now know is that adolescence is a period of enormous growth and potential, but also extraordinary vulnerability to the onset of mental health problems. So our focus has been squarely on that period and how to help parents to be able not only to survive, we could say, because a lot of us who are parents, we could say we're survivors of the adolescent years, but actually how to thrive, how to connect with their child, how to understand their child, how to move with their child so their child starts to be able to grow and be able to explore the world. We've done a lot of research. We've done longitudinal research. We've been able to show that with a 10-week intervention, parents start to feel less depressed. They start to feel less stressed. And really importantly, they start to be able to regulate emotions within the relationship with their child. And then in turn, kids start to actually do better across multiple metrics of mental health, and they start to regulate as well. And so when you're building resilience, if you think of it this way, we're building it in the relationships, in those close relationships within families, to help to promote the development of capacities within the child. And one of the most important things I think that I focus on is not just emotion regulation, but when, a child or a young adult can understand that they can turn to others in times of need, they're able to go further. And they're able to understand that there is a network around them that they can resource. We think of resilience in that way that's kind of localized within the family, but I'm very aware that everything I've talked about in resilience, you can think about the family and the circle of caregivers, connections and relationships with the broader community, with culture. Culture is a powerful source of resilience. And so when we're thinking about building protective factors, I think we're thinking about building that kind of connection within families, within all of those different levels in which our families are embedded. I could go on at length, but I don't want to do that. I want to hear what other people have to say and to learn from that. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Marlene. I love that flip to resilience. I think that really applies. Mary, did you want to build on that?
Sure. I love what Marlene was saying, and we often think about adolescence and toddlerhood as a little bit synonymous, right? Because those periods of time where there's immense neural growth and change in development, and so sometimes it feels like adolescents are just big toddlers walking around, right? And so that parallel in doing that work with families in that way really resonated with me, because it is, kind of the same work that we're doing, just in different ways. When I think about promoting resilience or promoting infant mental health, which is the area that I think about, I think about those universal factors, right, that we want for all children. And that, that we might think about with like parent support groups or parent education groups. So in Ontario, we have early on programs, right? Those are our family resource centers that families can go to and have access to those types of supports, or high quality childcare, right? We think about that as those ways to promote infant mental health and growth. In my lens, and getting back to Maureen about language and how it matters, when I think about the promotion of protective factors, I think about that in the mitigation of adversity and in the context of risk. And that, and those are the families that I work with, where they come from extreme risk, and where the parents are a lot of times arrested adolescents, because their growth and development has arrested at the time when their trauma was more pronounced and when their substance use began. So in a lot of ways, the parents that we see are adolescents. And so our approaches need to be sort of at that dual level, right? There's that parallel process going on where we're trying to support the parent and to guide them to be able to support the child. And And the adversities that we see are, those biological or genetic conditions, right, that children are born with. They can be a lack of the social determinants of health. So a lot of our families come from situations where the social economic conditions have a huge impact on the way that they're able to function and to raise their children. And then, there's ACEs and trauma kind of on top of that, right? So when I'm thinking about protective factors, I'm thinking about how to intervene in all of those levels of adversity, which is why we have sort of that wraparound approach for families where we're looking at like Maslow's hierarchy of needs for better, for example, right? That we're looking to support that stabilization first and then help parents to grow and attain those skills that will ultimately support their children and their children's growth and development. Maybe I'll end there and look forward to hearing what Emily's going to say.
Yeah, that's it. There you go, Emily, go ahead.
Great, thank you. I've been really enjoying listening to how you both are approaching this idea of protective factors and the idea of resilience as a core component, but a conceptualization of resilience as being really relationally embedded. And I think, that really helps us to ensure that our thinking about this is removed from the individual kind of level as an inherent kind of trait that you have or you don't have, and instead really placing that within the context of how this person lives and grows and operates in this world. And so a lot of the work that we've been doing in Agenda Gap, we think about resilience also along these lines, where the relationship within the program is so critical, and also how can we use those relationships to help to create changes within policies and practices that shape better conditions that are conducive to positive mental health and well-being. And while I was reflecting on this notion of protective factors, which I think maybe my ideas are quite aligned with how Mary was speaking about it, in the sense that not necessarily the shield as Marlene was kind of conveying, but the idea that protective factors, we can't always mitigate the risk factors, we can always mitigate the risk factors. We can't always change the risk factors. Sometimes the children, the youth, the communities that we're working with, those risk factors are going to be more immovable. But we can always work to build those protective factors that help to mitigate some of the risk or prevent some of the harm that could be associated with those. And so those were just a couple of reflections. But in thinking about the work that we do with youth and with adult allies who support them in their efforts to create systems change, I was thinking about how there often is this tendency to kind of revert back to a focus on risk factors, despite all of the conversations that we have about the importance of protective factors and bringing a strengths-based orientation to this work as per mental health promotion, and sometimes even to go more downstream than risk factors themselves to the adverse consequences that result from those risk factors in community. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity that remains to really foreground the promotion of protective factors and the ways that we can work together and across different groups, across partnerships with community to try and create change and to strengthen protective factors.
Thank you so much, Emily, and thanks to all three of you for starting that conversation. And there is actually a comment that just appeared in the chat that was about that risk factor versus protective factor, and sort of how do we address both, or do is there one maybe area to look at that's more important in mental health promotion? I don't know if maybe any of the panelists want to sort of address that question, the factors, the protective factors versus the risk factors. Emily, you sort of touched on it a little bit. Marlene or Mary, did you want to pick up on that?
I could certainly add that, I think there is a real need for us to move away from concern about, putting things into categories, so to speak. That there's a lot of intersections between how risk and protective factors unfold over the lifespan. The other thing I think that sometimes we run into is that, and Mary, you kind of spoke about it, trauma. There can be, all sorts of genetic or other conditions, deep poverty, discrimination, these types of things. Sometimes there's, I think, an unspoken but intuitive view that if you add up all those risk factors, they are going to set a trajectory for that child or that young person's life as they go forward. And I think that that's a very much a slippery slope. I know working with adolescents, there was clinically, I'm also a clinical psychologist, a view that almost by the time kids hit adolescence and they're dealing with multiple mental health problems, it's kind of too late. There's too much risk. And it doesn't matter if you were to build things of protective factors. I think that view has been mitigated somewhat, but we have to understand that there's more plasticity in human development than there are fixed pathways, except for some very major kind of insults on the biologically, neurobiologically that can occur. And for that reason, I think what Emily is talking about is that upside of looking at how do we build at the individual, at the family, at the community level, this kind of, we call it protective factors, but opportunities for relationships and trust, because I think that that's where you'll see better payoffs, for lack of a better word. But I do mean that. I mean better payoffs economically. We are so missing the boat on the cost savings, payoffs in terms of the reduction of the burden of suffering on children, youth, and families. So that's, I don't know, Mary, or if
Yeah.
you want to add.
Mary, go ahead.
Maybe the only other thing I'll add is that, and really similar to what both Emily and Marlene were saying, is that there are developmentally these touch points where there are opportunities, right? The families I see are steeped in risk from the moment the children are born and before, right? But that early parenting relationship and a pregnancy often is a window of opportunity where a person is often more prepared and more motivated to make changes that they might not have necessarily made before. And when we can offer the right kinds of services, the right kinds of relationships and support, I think it is more than just mitigating risk. It is offering protection to, that infant or young child as they move through their life. And so I think that there is really there can be a nuanced difference between them. And I think that there are different touch points, when kids enter school, when there's, when kids enter high school, right? That there are these periods of time where kids and parents and kids are more willing to think about changes and to think about doing things differently. And so those are the important parts that we need to think about as clinician scientists and policymakers.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. So let's move to another area of questions, looking at current social, economic, and political context that we are all in right now. I'm curious if you could speak to trends in child and adolescent mental health promotion and how that's being impacted by the context that we're in right now, thinking about the social, economic, and political context. Emily, did you want to begin?
Sure, I can begin. Thanks. And I was also just reflecting on the new question in the chat. So my brain is kind of going around in a few circles here. But in terms of current times, I think we're living in a world that, there's a lot going on right now. There's a lot that challenges mental health and well-being. It can feel quite divisive. And I think that mental health promotion offers a really great orientation to well-being that has broad implications and that can fit across political ideologies and is particularly useful in the context of social and economic insecurity, for example. And so, I think there's a long way for us to go in terms of how we're bringing forth mental health promotion to the agenda. But I guess I'm optimistic about the ways that may resonate widely in current times. And also reflecting on some of the leadership that our colleagues in other countries, for example, in Ireland, have been providing in recent years in terms of really bringing a national approach to mental health promotion to their political agendas and really signaling, coordinated investment into this type of work and the workforce that is required to be able to do this type of effort well. And I can pause and then maybe come back on the reflections on the comment in the chat later.
Thanks, Emily. Mary, do you want to go?
So, I think we know a lot of things, right? When I think about what we know about protection and promoting resilience, I'm in a clinical sphere, and I can talk about 30 years ago, there were a lot of things we knew and it just didn't feel like other parts were sort of catching up to that at that point, right? And then, 20 years ago, when information about brain science, about the importance of positive stressors and mitigating toxic stress and came to light, and we started talking about that more commonly, and now we're starting to connect those pieces together. And so I think from a clinical perspective, we have a lot of knowledge. From a research perspective, we have a lot of knowledge. Policymakers have been making changes, and there are so many more opportunities to think about mental health and to add mental health as part of that political agenda. I just don't know that we're all doing it together yet, right? And I think that's where we can have more impact if we start sort of coordinating those pieces a little bit better together. And then bringing in about something that Emily was saying is that community wisdom piece, right? I don't know that we're necessarily connecting to community wisdom, and especially when it goes when we think about sort of the diverse communities that have some involvement in mental health interventions and promoting protective factors. So I think that that we could have greater impact. And so yeah, maybe I'll just leave it there for now. Those are just my random thoughts about.
Thanks, Mary. Go ahead, Marlene.
Yeah, and I just wanted to pick up on some of the comments that are really talking about the broader social context. And first of all, how we can leverage communities and caring adults in communities, both with reinforcing the view that a child needs a community, and that all of us can provide even the smallest types of supports in our neighborhoods go a far distance to increase a child's sense of safety and so on. And also about the schools and how the schools should be modeling compassion and support and acceptance of diversities and so on. But I want to go back to your point, Emily, and what they're doing in Ireland and what they're doing in Sweden, which they've done a long time ago, is that there's a national strategy that every parent has access to parenting supports for their child. It's part of just the system there. And what a smart decision that is. There used to be a saying that, mental health was the orphan of health. And then the saying was that child mental health is the orphan of the orphan. And I would say adolescent mental health is even a further orphan. And until we as a nation actually understand that mental health is health, and we invest in health, and you have those investments so we can coordinate, Mary. I think we do ourselves a great disservice. We know what works. We have a lot of tools to work at various levels of the individual, of the family, of the community, and so on. And yet, many provinces in Canada don't even have a child and youth mental health plan in their province. I think, quite frankly, we need to get our act together. I'm sorry to say in those terms, but after being in this field for a long time, something has to change at a national level in terms of policy and funding for mental health, and especially for child and youth investments. So I guess that's my rant for today. It's a frequent one if it makes it feel any better, but
Thanks so much. Yeah, the questions are really coming in now, which I encourage keep doing. Just to pick up on a couple, the first one there was about relationships, and that being a cornerstone to support parents, families, and children. I think we sort of talked about it a bit with respect to protective factors. I know, Emily, maybe your head, I think you said, was already spinning thinking about that. Did you want to return to that question?
Sure, I think I do. But I'm also now thinking about the funding at a national level, and I'm just reflecting a bit on some of the past conversations that I've had as part of our work with the Agenda Gap funded by MHPIF, and talking, amongst projects and the supportive teams about scale up and how do we start to spread and provide access to the positive effects of these programs more widely over time. And Mary and Marlene have both commented on how we know a lot of things. And we know a lot of things. And so the issue sometimes isn't about the need for new knowledge necessarily, but getting that knowledge into practice and getting it into the hands of those who can use it to have impact. And that, I think, is a key barrier here in Canada, let's say. And in some of the conversations that I've had with different teams, the question has been posed back to us about, would you like to connect with other projects and hear about their struggles in this area as well? And my response is no, I don't want to hear about other people's struggles necessarily. What I want is for us to use this critical mass of people who are all invested in doing this work to advocate and apply pressure on our governments to take action in new ways and to fund mental health in a comprehensive way that attends to mental health promotion through prevention and through to treatment and recovery. And right now, we aren't doing that. And people are suffering and lives are lost, and we continue to funnel money into very reactive downstream types of approaches. And so as individual I don't think that it's our responsibility necessarily to try and figure out, how do we change systems necessarily, but how can we collectively use our voice and use this knowledge that we have, get it into the hands of those who can use it, and make that help to create a system that supports that in happening and demands that it happens, because that's not where we're at right now. And so that was not at all a response to the question that you posed, but I think it links in the sense that we've moved away from a collective kind of society, and we operate in these silos, and we're not there lifting people up and creating those relationships that do protect over time. And so, Marlene was commenting, as was Mary, about how important those key adults are in young people's lives, whether it be in community, whether it be, as the comment says, family members, aunties, uncles, grandparents, etc. But we haven't been living in those ways where we're connected like we, our societies once were. And I think that's a key part of what's missing. And one final thought, sorry, in this work that we do around youth and youth voice and how important it is that they have, a say in what happens around them and the policies and practices that affect them. we do so by recognizing that they shouldn't be responsible for creating those better conditions on their own. We've been a part of creating or contributing to the systems that now shape their lives. And so as adults, it is, part of our ethical practice to be there alongside and to be their allies and to support and to use the levers that we have to help them get what they need.
Thank you, Emily. Marlene or Mary, would either of you like to comment provide further comment at this point?
Well, I would just say, well said.
Yeah.
And you articulated exactly, I think, what lots of us are feeling in this work and the experience. And it's so difficult to be doing this work and trying to do what we can and kind of pasting things together to get it to work, knowing that if we don't make that bridge over to adoption in a funded way, through government funding, that we walk away and projects invariably kind of close. That's what happens, and we start again and we start again. So thank you, Emily, for saying that in a very powerful way.
Mm. So there's a couple of comments here around the online environment. So I'm just wondering, maybe we maybe talk a bit about that. There are two comments here. One around addressing disinformation and social media impacts, and the others around insights on online spaces and how they might pose both as protective and risk factors. Would anyone like to speak to this? Mary?
I can start the conversation a little bit. And I really struggle with this whole online thing. And when we were in a pandemic and we were forced to deliver our services online for a really short period of time, at least for our population of families, it was so not effective. When you're thinking about multi-stressed families who are living in contexts of risk, where there's active interpersonal violence in the home, where there are infants and young children in the home, and where people don't have very good access to, to the kinds of supports that they need to receive those services, it doesn't work, right? And so, but I know that that's limited, right? The other part of me struggles with that we're trying to tell parents that they're the most important person in their child's life, that they need to have good relationships with their children, that the kids need to put their phones down, that there's research, there's books that talk about how, social media is ruining our children's brains and their lives. But then we're getting our information online. Like, there just feels like a disconnect, right? In how we're telling parents they need to do things, and then in the way that we're giving parents information. So there's that real missed opportunity for the parallel process and growth of the whole system. One thing. The other thing is access. And I totally understand that there are communities of people and people that work and that people that aren't available for services 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, who need to access information in other ways. So I always feel like I'm in flux about the whole online thing. And then disinformation is just a whole other piece in this, right? There was a comment earlier, I can't remember which of my esteemed colleagues talked about that there's a part of us that needs to trust communities more, that we used to take care of each other in communities, that we used to have in-person relationships and rely on grannies and aunties and grandfathers and all of those other people to have relationships with and support us with our well-being and our knowledge. And I think that that's a missing piece when we're always staring at a screen. So I have no answers, but I feel like it's a really important question. And and one that we need to keep talking about. I even miss not being in person right now. Like, I've done panels where even being online like this is great to talk to all of you like this, but like, I suck when I'm just like talking online. Like, I really wish I could be in a room and talking to all of you in person. So maybe it's just a personal bias.
No, I would agree that I wish we were all together in person. Marlene, did you want to respond?
Mary, you don't suck online. I mean, it's great to be able to talk to you online. But the way I understand things now, or my view of the online environment, is that there is an abundance of information and misinformation, and there is a lack of knowledge and support. And we're attracted to more and more information as our anxiety goes up, and it actually is of very little benefit, and I think most parents now worry a lot about their kids. We've always worried about our kids, but they worry a lot about their children, and the online environment only exacerbates that. And so, it's not, and we also know that online information by itself doesn't actually produce much in therapeutic gain, that you have to have actually some sort of clinical support for people who are struggling. So that's what I would say for online, but I saw there's a really interesting question here about longitudinal evidence. And if I could just comment briefly before we hear from Emily, which is that it's really interesting about, this idea is that can we build that resilience in those early years? And I think absolutely, like Mary, you are doing that work. But I think we have this idea, and my metaphor for this is that it's like buying a car, a brand new car, really great car, making sure that it's all tuned up. We put gas in the car and we think it's going to drive forever. I mean, we kind of treat early investments in children's mental health that way. What I like about this is they're talking about boosters. We need to understand, as Mary said, that there are developmentally important periods of neuro and social emotional plasticity, and to provide these quotes boosters, if you will, or availability of interventions where parents can go for a tune-up and learn about their child and their relationship, and also about themselves. Where are they going as a parent in that relationship? So we shouldn't be looking for investments in early childhood that then we see some small effect size in adulthood and say, yay, we've won the day. We should be looking to think, how do we support mental health along the developmental trajectory, so we have the best kind of system for our children and our adolescents as they move forward.
Thanks so much for bringing that question in, Marlene. Emily?
Thank you. I don't think I've got anything helpful to add. That was such a wonderful analogy, Marlene, and it's something that I always struggle with in terms of, that one investment, that tick box that we make to say we've done something and therefore everything's okay and we can walk away and know that we tried. I think about it in the work that we're doing with our team, separate from Agenda Gap, but around substance use and how schools respond to substance use and how they're supporting K through 12, this area of focus. And a lot of the time, the belief is that, in grade 6 or grade 9, you deliver this program over 6 weeks and then you've done it. And then you're surprised if it doesn't work, and the results show that there wasn't a whole lot of effect in terms of behavior and substance use harms. And so, I think this applies similarly in this context. And again, that developmental piece is so critical. What you're offering to somebody, kindergarten, grade 1, 2, 3, is going to be very different from what you start to introduce as you get into the middle school years and then into the, high school and older adolescent age groups. And the needs are going to be different as well. And so I think it's just seeing those as opportunities to continue to surround that child with the supportive conditions that create opportunities for their well-being and make that a possibility.
Thank you so much. I think some folks are really interested in the booster periods, seeing in the comments. So perhaps that could also be something that we could follow up with. I'm not sure, Katie Hub, or if anyone wants to type a resource there in the chat too, that might help. I think there's one other question that we haven't yet addressed. So we've talked about sort of the online social context, the political context in terms of funding. I do see one comment about systemic issues and things like racism. And we haven't, I don't think, addressed that yet. So I'd like to bring us there. So this one person has asked about anti-racism education and how incorporating compassion, empathy is being promoted or thought about in work and mental health promotion. Are any of the panelists able to speak to this? Yeah, go ahead, Emily. Thank you.
I was also looking at that comment and thinking about a lot of the work that the schools are doing, for example, around social and emotional learning that brings in pieces around empathy, around connection, around discrimination, and how we combat that. And it's often not framed as mental health promotion. And I think that's one of the challenges, is we miss some of the really great work that's happening out there because of our language and the way that we kind of, put things into categories. This is mental health promotion, this is social emotional learning, and yet, it's all one and the same in terms of creating those conditions for well-being. And I was just going to share a bit of an example from the work of some Agenda Gap youth that we previously had been engaging with in Vancouver region. This is one of our BC groups, and they surfaced themselves that the anti-racism policies in schools were not going far enough to protect kids like them. And so this was the beauty of Agenda Gap, is that the youth themselves identify what the issues are that are, impacting mental health in their communities. And then the adult allies support them in taking that action. And so they prepared presentations and did advocacy around this issue, including presenting to the school board trustees around their policies and the ways in which they weren't going far enough. And this led to calls to action and ways that change could be integrated into the system. And what we heard was that change did indeed happen. There were a number of adult allies within the schools that were supporting this effort. But there were also stories of teachers who had changed their practices because they came to understand the ways that they were causing harm in the delivery of certain curriculum or the approach that they were taking. And so I'd say, I think that when we can really address these issues alongside community and in ways that matter to them, then they'll be the most impactful.
Thanks so much, Emily. Marlene, did you want to comment?
Yeah, thank you, Emily. And we're talking about how at multiple levels of the systems that we're embedded in, we can work to move equity and to move forward compassion and acceptance and so on. I think it's important. I think in our work of our team, one of the things that has been a real priority for us is to really pay attention to whom we are not reaching, underserved populations, and why is it that that's the case, and what do we do about that? And when I say we, I say, how do we together do something about that? How do people who are in those underserved populations help us understand what they need in order for this to be accessible to them, to feel safe for them, and how do they make it their own? And so we've worked with, we've had the privilege to be invited into Indigenous communities around the province and have learned so much in that process of what is this for them, this idea of relationships. And to be perfectly honest, I've learned far more than what I had to bring to the table in those discussions. And reaching the carers and the parents of gender diverse youth who are isolated often and don't have access to supports. How do we ensure that we have accessibility in that way? And Mary, I'm thinking that probably with your families that you're seeing who probably are dealing with deep poverty, poor resources, and so on, how it is that they can feel safe and welcome and without shame in being able to come to your support.
Mary, go ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, that happens in a number of different ways, and you're so right, Marlene, that the families that we see have, because of the life circumstances that they've lived, they've experienced judgment, racism, colonial violence, systemic racism, neighborhood, lack of safety in their neighborhoods, and so what we've done with the center itself, not only making it accessible from a transportation point of view, it's in the middle of the city, it's a place that's not institutional, right? So when you walk into the center, it feels homey. It's not an office. There's a huge kitchen and living room space. So the space feels respectful, and we really try to pay attention to traumatic responses, to systems and to people with respect to the space. We offer basic needs support. So there's food, there's transportation, there's clothing, there's, meeting those basic needs. And if a mom is only coming to the center with her child to access basic needs support for the first few times, that's totally good, right? Like, it's about building those relationships, and that's our job, to demonstrate that we are not judgmental, to demonstrate that we are open, to listening, to hearing their stories, so it's a process. Relationships are a process, right? Rupture and repair are parts of relationships. Does everything go smoothly all the time? No, but it's about, helping people to understand that it's not a like, no, this isn't working and you're out. We're in this together. We're in this to make relationships, and that we know that it's going to take time, right? And so, we've got lots of different engagement strategies that we think of from a trauma-informed perspective, from a cultural and diversity perspective, but those are just some of the main ones that we use to support people to be able to access the service.
Thanks so much, Mary. So we're approaching the end of the session. I'm wondering if we could chat a bit about opportunities you see in your work in mental health promotion. I'd love to hear some of the things happening in your work that give you that kind of positive boost of, what you're really excited about in terms of the opportunities to build toward protective factors in mental health promotion. Marlene, did you want to go first?
Sure. As I think some of our most uplifting things that have happened in the past year as we're moving forward, some of the longitudinal data analysis, which I could bore you silly about, but all of that kind of really showing us a little bit more of what works for whom, and finding out that actually with families of children where their children are really struggling behaviorally with major challenges and a kind of a sense of not being emotionally too empathic, they're changing the fastest, the most, and sustaining that over the longest periods of time. So that's been uplifting. Hearing parents' voices have been really important, having, because we've always done this in our work, our last kind of closing meeting with the parents is actually for them to reflect and to tell us what was useful, what wasn't, how did this fit for them, how can we make this better for people coming forward, and having their voices come forward and being able to follow their leads. We've been working very hard to engage fathers. You'll notice here we're all women. I don't know in the people listening what the diversity is, but traditionally we don't reach fathers, and I don't know, Mary, if you see many fathers coming in, but we're very engaged and have worked to reach fathers and create a way of helping practitioners have strategies to do that, and also to create materials that invite fathers, and we've heard from fathers, and fathers are very interested in being able to have that journey through adolescence with their kids, and that's been really reinforcing. And on the radar now, as we've been working with culturally diverse families and families coming from different parts of the world, we're starting work with a wonderful postdoc who's just joined our lab in how can we reach out with to support families from Ukraine, and how do we understand trauma in dislocation? How do we understand how we might be able to hold them up in trusting their parenting wisdom in this new country under such adverse conditions? So I would say those are some opportunities that we have. We have a country of diversities, which is fantastic, and we need to be able to flow with that and understand how we can bring what we know to the table and how we can learn from them.
Great, thanks, Marlene. Emily?
Thank you, and thanks, Marlene. It was so great to hear about you know, some of the advances that your team is making in terms of reaching some of the populations that are a bit more difficult to connect with in this area. And it reminded me, you know, not just those being opportunities, but those really being wins. And one of the things that we do in Agenda Gap is we celebrate wins, even little itty bitty ones, because we recognize that this is a long game. And so we're not running a sprint, this is a marathon, and you know, the change that we want to achieve is change that takes time to build, and it takes time to build in the support for that type of work. And so I think one of the opportunities that we could kind of leverage from that idea is that we all celebrate the little wins along the way as we try to build towards a more comprehensive and cohesive system of mental health promotion in Canada. And then another area that I am excited about, or I see as an opportunity, is within kind of the research realm, is trying to expand or build upon the methodologies that are available to us to showcase the work that we're doing. And I think not all of us are in a position where the more traditional approaches or methodologies, such as a randomized controlled trial, which I know works very well for Marlene's team, I think, but which we've had a harder time in bringing forward in our work. And so we struggle sometimes in the field of mental health promotion, to show the impact of our work, especially when, you know, we have these socio-ecological or multi-level types of impacts that we're hoping to achieve, and when the time horizons are extended as they are when you're working towards systems change. And so this past year, we've been experimenting with some different methodologies, including something called ripple effects mapping. And we gave a webinar session on this last fall as part of the KDE Hub. So some of you may have checked that out. But it's a participatory and community engaged process where you bring people together to hear about the ways that a particular population health intervention has had impact in their community and over time. And so we had the opportunity to do that with one of our communities here in the Greater Vancouver region, 4 years post Agenda Gap implementation, to hear how you know, there continue to be these ripple effects through their community, and the ways that some of the language and the learnings that had taken place were now showing up in, you know, municipal 10-year plans, for example, or how it had reshaped how school systems were responding and creating opportunities for meaningful youth engagement. So, you know, I think there's opportunities for us to continue to grow the scholarship around this work and be able to share it more widely for impact.
Thanks so much, Emily. Mary?
Thanks. You know, we've had the opportunity over the last 30 years to show and demonstrate that we have an approach that's effective in engaging families and in supporting moms to be able to make change in their own behaviors and in their parenting behaviors, and that there's been an improvement in the relationships with their children. And the work that we're doing now is, for the first time, being able to look long term at the outcomes for children, and to, you know, and to show those impacts of early intervention for kids longitudinally. And so that's a really exciting part of the work that we're doing right now. We've been able to incorporate a social return on investment component as part of that work. And it's been an amazing process to be able to do like a theory of change map for a really complex program, and to map our own evidence onto it, quantitative and qualitative, and to ultimately show the impact that the program is having from a financial perspective. Because when you are a community-based program, it really is like you're just like crossing your fingers every year, right? That you get to continue, and that the work can continue. And so that's going to be a really important piece for us to be able to demonstrate the effectiveness of the program. Other parts of work that we're doing is we have an interpersonal violence group that we have disseminated to 34 communities across Canada, and that we have evaluated and shown a lot of efficacy with that. So we're hoping to be able to continue with that work and to add a parent intervention program onto that as well, because we know internally that when we connect those two programs together, that there's more effectiveness and more opportunity for change in the family environment for the parents and for the child. So that's interesting work that we're hoping to do. And I'm really heartened by, and I know Marlene was talking about, data sets. I mean, please read the people that are here, right? Like Emily's work and Marlene's work is so impressive. Please go and look at their work. Other work that is amazing in our country is the University of Calgary has the All Our Family study, which is showing the long-term impact of providing supports to families. So people should look at that as well as, great Canadian evidence. And I'm really hoping that through investments like this and having things like the KDE Hub, because I think that this is an amazing support and an amazing way for people to be able to share and disseminate knowledge, that we're going to have that more relational approach that we have with families, that I really think is what needs to happen between clinicians, researchers, and policymakers, is that we have to get together, we have to talk, and we have to have good relationships. So that's heartening, and I think it is an opportunity.
Thank you so much, Mary. Well, as our session comes to an end, everyone probably just got the notification. I'll just offer maybe one more minute each to our panelists to share any parting thoughts to the audience. Emily, would you like to go first?
No. Yeah, just want to extend a sincere thank you to everyone for interest in mental health promotion and the work that you are all leading through your own programs and efforts in communities and contributing to the great conversation today. I really enjoyed, taking a look into the chat and seeing where people are thinking about current issues and how to navigate them, because I really think coming together and sharing ideas ultimately will lead to the best outcomes. So just an appreciation for the opportunity to have this conversation today.
Thank you. Marlene?
Yeah, I'd also like to say thank you for the opportunity to meet you, Mary, see you again, Emily, and all of you here, and a great conversation. And all I would say to those people who are listening is that do whatever you can to press on systems to get us to a place in Canada where we see mental health as truly health and developmental mental health. Mary, no one should be sitting with great evidence in a program crossing their fingers about whether or not they get funded. It wouldn't be okay if that was a physical health problem, and it shouldn't be okay if it's serving the mental well-being of families.
Absolutely. Thanks, Marlene. Mary?
I am so grateful that this was recorded because there are so many things that Emily and Marlene said that I want to go back to and reflect on. So I appreciate that so much. I appreciate the opportunity to have been here and to have this conversation. And And this was a great way to spend this time. So thank you so much.
Thank you. So please join me in thanking our panelists, Emily, Marlene, and Mary, for their insights this afternoon. I really enjoyed the conversation with you all. I appreciate your flexibility in building off one another and responding to the questions. That was really a dynamic way to spend our afternoon as well. I agree, Mary. Thank you also to the audience who chose this breakout group for coming, and look forward to continuing the conversation as we move forward with the symposium. Thank you so much.